Hey, what's up? Just some new guy here. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. So today I'm just going to share some thoughts on Valorant, specifically what is in my opinion 5 easy to execute ideas to help you move out of your current rank into the next one. Now, I've played about maybe 40-50 hours, so I'm by no means an expert, but having played quite a few ranked matches with players all the way from Iron to Plat, I've noticed quite a few mistakes that I constantly make, and it'd be good to share how I've overcome some of these things to help you improve as well. Now, I know there are a ton of videos out there that offer great tips on how to improve your game, but I thought I'd share some experience from someone who is fairly new, and I'll also break down the tips that worked for me. So this video is not meant for someone who is already in Plat trying to get through to Diamond or Immortal. It's more for everyone who is starting to get frustrated about why they're stuck in Bronze or Silver. So hopefully you'll find some value here. What I'll be doing is slowing down the footage so that you can see frame by frame what's going on in some of the games that I've played, and also to share some of the insight around what it is I was thinking about at the time. Alright, these are my 5 areas of improvement in order of how difficult it was to address. Movement error, engagement range, defensive play, holding angles, and crosshair positioning. Okay, so movement error. The best way to think about it is if you move while shooting, your bullets are going to be really far off target. Okay, so the more you move, the further off target they're going to be. So you'll be able to see in this overlay that I've put here, when I move, my outer crosshairs are basically expanding, which essentially provide a reference for where your bullet could end up if those 4 points were used to draw like a circle, right? So you can imagine pointing your crosshair to a target, but if you're moving, your bullet's going to end up in any one point that sits within that circle. One thing to note about Valorant compared to other games, like if you came from Destiny or COD, is that the movement error in this game is especially punishing. Essentially, you want to stop moving before you click the fire trigger. Otherwise, there's a very high chance your bullet's just going to fly off, and after the first 2 bullets fly, the rest of them are just going to go all over the place. So addressing this issue is pretty straightforward. The first thing you got to do is go into your settings and turn on movement error for the outer lines, and that's this right here. And then the second thing is to just be mindful that when you're in game, stop and then fire. It's very tempting to see the enemy and then start firing while you're still moving, but there's no way that that's going to work out because of how punishing the movement error is in this game. So just keep that in mind. So in this next clip, what's happened is I've noticed that there's an enemy behind this corner, and to illustrate moving error, I've basically jumped and started firing. Now you see frame by frame, the second I'm mid-air and I pull the trigger, those bullets are going to fly everywhere, and none of them are going to. It's really only after I've landed and you see the crosshair outer lines revert to the middle that some of those shots are going to hit. But unfortunately, the thing about recoil is that after you've fired off the first 5 bullets, even if you're completely still, you'll get firing error, so the bullets still won't hit. It's also the same for running. So you're moving from one side to the other and you see the enemy, you have to stop first, wait for the crosshair to reset, and then fire. So you'll see in this clip, I don't stop and none of those bullets hit. Now that's a good segue into the next idea, which is engagement range. Now that's different from, tips that talk to things like recoil control and firing error specifically, because what engagement range is picking the right distance to start firing. Okay, so if you see an enemy and you have, say, a Phantom or a Vandal, these guns both have a very good effective range of say 0 to 30 meters. And by effective range, I don't mean damage effectiveness, I mean from a usability perspective, how effective it would be from specific distances. It's easy to sort of control the recoil and the firing area up until 30 meters. And then beyond that, it's really quite difficult to get more than 2 bullets lined up in exactly the same spot. So the advice I'd give to everyone is that you want to try to close out that distance between you and the enemy before you start engaging in fights. And if you have to shoot beyond 30 meters, you want to be tapping or burst firing, because if you try and spray, the bullets will go everywhere. And this is something that we see with new players a lot, because what will happen is they'll start shooting and then try to close that distance. And as you know, the movement error is just going to go off. In this next clip, I've already identified that it's a long range engagement. And so the way I approach it is to tell myself, look, I know it's long range, therefore I should just keep it to burst fires and tap shots, right? And there are 3 or 4 enemies, and even when they do see me, it's hard for them to react to it because they're still moving and the shots just won't hit if that's the case. Now obviously you're not going to have much time to be thinking about, am I moving or am I stationary, am I far enough or am I close enough when you're in game. And so that kind of leads us into this next point, which is defensive play. And what that effectively means is that you want to try to play less aggressively. Don't rush out into the open, right? Just think of it as wanting to stay put so that the enemy is the one that's moving and the enemy is the one that's closing the distance. Because if you reverse that and you're the one trying to close the distance, you're the one trying to move, that just means that you're put in more positions where you're going to be experiencing firing error and moving error. Now, playing defensively is something that I definitely struggle with a lot in the first few weeks of playing the game. And I think that's possibly because coming from a game like Destiny or COD, those games kind of rewarded you for being in the gunfights constantly. You know, you get in the gunfight, you respawn, you do it again. Whereas Valorant, because of the time limit and the objectives that you're trying to play, which is, you know, either defending the spike sites or planting the spikes, that creates a very different dynamic with respect to things like being aggressive or being defensive, right? And so the key to take away from all of this is that if you're defending a site, don't push up. Just hold angles and wait for the enemy to come to you. Every once in a while, you have to sort of change things up by, you know, pushing up so you can control parts of the map. But as a general rule of thumb, especially if you're just new to the game, you want to be watching the site and making sure that you can see where enemies are coming in and holding them off, because that is the objective of defensive play. Now if you're attacking, what that means is you push up, but you push up slowly with a mindset that there is probably going to be someone who is too aggressive on the other team who will walk into your crosshair. These last 2 tips or ideas are very complementary to the first 3, in the sense that in order to reduce that movement error, the firing error, closing out your engagement range, and playing defensive, the best way to do that is to hold an angle. Okay, so what that means is wherever you are on the map, understand that, you know, you're like a turret and you want to be still moving only left to right to identify where you should be shooting. So you see in this clip, when I enter the site, I'm looking at small segments of the location to hold those angles. Or if I'm defending a site, I'll effectively be waiting for someone to enter that sort of cone of vision so that I can just snap to and fire. And the reason why holding an angle is so powerful is because, you know, like we talked about before, if your crosshair is already in the path of someone who's moving. You're already stationary, so you've eliminated all movement error. Okay, so this is half of the problem already solved. And then all you have to focus on is landing 1 to 3 shots on the enemy. Okay, depending on which gun you're using, right? But the objective is always to finish them off within 3 shots. Okay, so this means the only thing you have to worry about is the distance. So if you're holding an angle and you find that they're too far away, don't fret, just wait. Because if they're attacking, they have a time limit and they have to close that distance for you. So on this last point, which is crosshair positioning, this is one of those tips that pretty much every video out there gives you. And I guess it is a valid one in the sense that you have to learn how to position your crosshairs. And it comes whole into the concept of playing defensively, because if you're waiting for the enemy, then you have more time to think about where that crosshair is. When you progress through the ranks and you start playing with high level players who know where you're waiting, then that's a whole different issue. You got to keep moving out of your spot, otherwise you're going to get pre-fired at and you will die. But one thing I found frustrating about this tip was that all of it was about anticipating where the head height was. Okay, but the advice I'd sort of offer new players is that don't be so focused on where the head will be. As a general rule, if you're starting out, just try to get your crosshair higher than where you're comfortable. Okay, you're going to be playing through and you're going to have to be a bit more mindful about where the crosshair is, right? Because you're going to see that it's always a little bit below center. That's what we find like a lot of new players do, is that the crosshair is always a little bit below center. And the way to fix that is to just, if you see it below center, tell yourself to just move that cursor up. Okay, you'll be able to see in this clip here that it's a lot easier to start from a higher point and then drag your cursor down to hit the head as part of your corrective sort of movement, than to be too low and then push it up. Because the thing about these guns is that they always recoil upwards, and so once the recoil starts, if you're pushing upwards, you're no longer controlling the recoil. If anything, you're feeding it, and therefore the bullets are just going to fly everywhere. Okay, but you can see here that if I'm starting from the top, your natural movement with recoil control is to always drag down for the first few shots anyway. So dragging it down just means I'm maintaining an accurate firing all the way till the 5th bullet, at which point you can start your spray control there. Now I know you're thinking, if you shoot from under center and let the recoil go up, then that guarantees some shots to the body, right? And while that's true, ultimately if you shoot from the top down, your body's going to remember that it was too high, right? And it'll still create more of a focus on hitting the head. If you shoot from the bottom, get some shots in and manage to get the kill, your body's going to be thinking, oh, that's not too bad, I'll just keep doing that. And you'll never be able to move off being below center. There's a lot more to be said about crosshair positioning, and it's a very powerful tool to sort of elevate your game as you progress through the ranks. But if you're starting out at iron or bronze, you want to be focusing on just getting that crosshair above center. All right, and that's what this piece of advice is about in relation to the wider context of playing defensively. Making sure your crosshair is above center just means that you reduce the amount of time it takes for you to react to when someone walks into your zone of firing. Now this next clip, this is basically the combination of all of what we've talked about so far, and I'm going to have a defensive mindset. I'm turning the corner and watching just a small segment and allowing the enemy to overextend. And you'll see in that clip, the enemy walks into my cone of vision, and because I've had good crosshair placement, I can still take him out through the smoke. And that's a wrap. So here are the 5 points again for you to commit to memory. And these 5 points have worked for me, and I'm hoping they'll work for you to help you improve your game as well. Either way, let me know in the comments what you thought of the video. Were the points helpful? And if there's other things you'd like me to talk about with regards to Valorant or maybe another game, just let me know. And that will encourage me to keep making these videos and hopefully entertain you more. And of course, remember to like and subscribe, that always helps. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.